Some cases are remembered because of the answers they provide, others because they leave none. This is one of those cases. A murder that left behind an impenetrable silence instead of closure, and a series of questions that refused to fade with the passing of time. The crime took place in a quiet corner of the UK, an area where life followed a predictable, reassuring rhythm. People went to work, children walked to school. Doors were locked more out of habit than any real sense of fear. Serious crime was something you saw on the television news, a distant reality, not something you expected to find on your own doorstep. That profound sense of safety, however, did not survive this case. It was shattered, piece by piece, and never fully put back together. The victim lived what many would describe as an unremarkable life. They weren't isolated, but they weren't surrounded by constant attention either. They were someone who existed quietly, peacefully, within the comfort of their own routine. They had responsibilities to meet, plans for the future they were excited about, and people who cared for them deeply. Nothing, absolutely nothing about their life suggested it would end so violently, so abruptly. In the days leading up to the murder, there were no obvious warning signs. No threats had been reported. No heated disputes were witnessed. There was no unusual behavior that raised any concern among friends or family. The victim simply continued with their daily life, completely unaware that they were being watched or that their final hours were steadily approaching. When the body was eventually discovered, the horrifying reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. The initial shock gave way to a chilling wave of questions, and the location of the discovery raised the very first ones. It wasn't a random place. It wasn't a scene of chaos or disarray. It was precise, deliberate. It suggested a terrifying level of intention. Investigators quickly realized this was not a crime driven by a fleeting impulse or a robbery gone wrong. This was something different, something colder. Police immediately secured the scene and began the painstaking process of their investigation. But almost from the very beginning, problems started to appear. There were no clear signs of a forced entry, suggesting the victim might have known their killer or that the killer was incredibly careful. No definitive weapon was recovered at the scene or in the surrounding area. Again, there was no obvious trail leading away from the crime, no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to point investigators in the right direction. Forensic evidence did exist, but it failed to tell a complete and coherent story. Each result seemed to close one door while simultaneously opening two more. DNA might be found, but it wouldn't match anyone in the system. A fingerprint might be lifted, but it would belong to a known and cleared visitor from weeks prior. Every piece of physical evidence was a frustrating dead end, a fragment of a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Detectives turned their focus to the victim's personal life, hoping to find a motive hidden within their relationships. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, anyone who had regular contact was brought in for questioning. Some of these interviews certainly raised eyebrows. There were small inconsistencies in people's stories, gaps in timelines that couldn't be fully accounted for. Nothing strong enough to act on, no smoking gun, but just enough to keep the embers of suspicion alive. As a result, several individuals were quietly considered persons of interest. Each one had something about their story that didn't quite add up. Some had the access, the opportunity to commit the crime without raising alarm. Some had possible motives, hidden grudges, or secret conflicts that were only now coming to light. And some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, their proximity making them impossible to ignore. But suspicion alone is never enough to secure a conviction. Without solid, corroborating evidence, every single lead eventually collapsed under scrutiny, leaving investigators right back where they started. As the investigation dragged on from weeks into months, the pressure from the public and the media began to increase. The case dominated local headlines for a while, a subject of intense speculation and fear. But as with most stories, media attention intensified briefly, then slowly, it disappeared. Public interest faded as new events took over the news cycle. Life, for most, moved on. But for those closest to the victim, the pain never softened. It became a constant, unwelcome companion. For them, there was no moving on, and within the local community, behaviors began to change in subtle but significant ways. People became more cautious, more wary of strangers. Familiar streets that once felt safe now felt different, shadowed with an unspoken anxiety. The easy trust that had once defined the neighborhood was replaced with a quiet doubt. Conversations in shops and pubs lowered in volume when the case was mentioned. The murder had done more than take a single life. It had altered the very atmosphere of an entire community. Over time, progress on the investigation stalled completely. No new witnesses came forward with credible information. No new forensic breakthroughs emerged from the labs. The file grew thicker, filled with reports and dead-end leads, but no closer to a conclusion. Eventually, with all avenues exhausted, the case was officially classified as cold, not solved, not closed, just unfinished, permanent fixture in the archives of unsolved crimes. For the victim's family, the absence of answers became its own unique and prolonged form of suffering. There was no explanation for their loss, no accountability for the person who had inflicted so much pain, no justice to bring a sense of closure. All that remained were the same unanswered questions they had from day one, and the agonizing knowledge that someone responsible for this terrible act was never held to account. They were living, breathing, and walking free. Today, years later, the case remains unsolved. Somewhere, the truth exists. It's locked away in a memory. It's buried deep within a secret. It's held in a silence that has now lasted for years. And until that silence is finally broken, this case will remain what it has always been: a murder without justice, a mystery without a resolution, and a haunting reminder that some truths, the ones that matter most, never come easily. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more investigations into cases that deserve to be remembered.